What is the number one thing that if you could ask God to just totally remove from your life, the number one struggle or adversity or something that you're facing, what would that be? Now I know it's hard to think, maybe it's hard for you to think of it just right off the bat, just as soon as I ask it. But if you were to spend some time, what would you be asking God to remove from your life? Well, here's a second question. Why is it so important that we would devote an entire sermon series on keeping going through adversity? What is to be gained? What is so important about that? Well, I can tell you this. The greatest things in life are birthed out of adversity or through adversity. I mean, if you think about it, as every life enters into this world, it is a struggle. It's adversity. But it's the greatest gift when someone comes into this world. And as you look at the accomplishments and achievements and the relationships that you've had, and when you've grown closer to God, it's been through adversity where you had to deal with tough things and ask yourself tough questions to do that. I mean, ask any senior citizen and they'll tell you what got them to where they are right now is the adversity and the struggles that they had to go through. Look at the Bible, it's no different. All the great men and women of the Bible, when you look, they went through tremendous adversity. Moses, all that he went through. Joseph, the Apostle Paul, Esther, Mary, all the things that they had to go through to accomplish great things. Remember, we said this last week. Adversity is an uninvited, unwanted friend in the hands of an all-knowing God whose purpose is to rid us of our self-dependency and pride, usher us into a deeper intimacy with Jesus, and redirect our paths to ensure our greatest good and His greatest glory. If we're going to be the people who keep going, if we're going to be the people who don't quit, then one of the things we're going to have to deal with as we go through adversity is discouragement and criticism, because they're going to come. For many of you, you recognize the name of this author, Louis L'Amour. You realize that he sold 330 million books in his lifetime. Yet, he was rejected 200 times before Bantam Books took a chance on him. Dr. Seuss. Who doesn't love Dr. Seuss? Apparently, 27 publishers didn't love Dr. Seuss and rejected the idea. It was only on the 28th try that it was accepted and began to be published. Thomas Edison, inventing the light bulb, found 999 ways for it not to work. It only succeeded on the 1,000th try. Thomas Edison was fired from his first 2 jobs because he was said to be unproductive. The man who was said to be unproductive, when he died, had the patents on 1,093 inventions. See, setbacks in life are intended to be just that, setbacks. They are not to be the end of the story. They're not to be what defines us. When Jesus warned his disciples and spent so much time in that upper room warning them of the struggles, the adversity that they were going to be facing here very soon, in John 16, he tells them why. He says, the reason I'm telling you all of this is so that you do not fall away. The writer of the book of Hebrews had that same concern for the Christians there who were going through a difficult time. And he said this in Hebrews 10:36. You need to persevere so that when you have done the will of God, you will receive what He has promised. Quitting usually always means, we miss the reward. But we have to persevere and go through that. We have to have the spirit that keeps going. Now, the man that we're going to talk about during and use as an example through this series is Nehemiah. And Nehemiah had that kind of spirit. Nehemiah was a Jewish man working for the king of Persia. He didn't even live in Jerusalem. He was the cupbearer to the king, which in one way is an awesome job because it's a pie job, if you want to say that. You just taste the food, make sure it's not poison. That becomes a very difficult job if it turns out somebody is trying to kill the king and you get poisoned first. Some visitors came and stopped by and of course Nehemiah asked, hey, how are things back home in Jerusalem? And they told him, Nehemiah, things aren't going good. The city is in ruins, the walls have fallen down, the gates are burned, the people are really suffering. This crushed Nehemiah to his spirit. I mean, it devastated him to hear that about his hometown. And if you've ever been in that position, to hear that your people back home are suffering, it's a tough position to be in. But Nehemiah prayed and wept and mourned before God. And then he came up with a plan. He went to the king that he worked for and asked permission to go back to Jerusalem and to rebuild the walls there. The king went right along with it. He said, he had such a good relationship with Nehemiah and Nehemiah with him. He allowed him to do that, and he sent him back to let him rebuild the walls. And this is where we pick up our story in chapter 4, because the work has begun and they're making great progress. But we see this in Nehemiah chapter 4, starting with verse 1. When Sanballat, now he's going to turn out to be a bad guy. He is somebody that's not building a wall. He just wants to make sure it doesn't get built, because it suits him that the people remain defenseless and very poor people. It says, when Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and was greatly incensed. He ridiculed the Jews. It goes on in verse 2, it says, and in the presence of his associates in the army of Samaria, he said, what are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore their wall? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they finish in a day? Can they bring the stones back to life from these heaps of rubble, burned as they are? Tobiah, the Ammonite, who was at his side, said, what are they building? If even a fox climbed on it, he would break down their walls of stone. I mean, they're doing a great thing. Nehemiah and these other people, they're doing a great thing. They're building the walls of Jerusalem back. They're bringing security to the people. Everybody would be in favor of that, right? No, wrong. Not everybody gets in your corner when you're doing the right thing. You see, doing the right thing is just about always met with some type of opposition. You start going to AA meetings, and the next thing you hear is criticism about going to them. Oh, you'll never stick with it. What are you trying to do? I mean, that's where you've been all your life. That's where your family's been. You'll never make it. Or you're trying to work on your marriage and you start going to the marriage counselor, and after a couple of visits, things get worse instead of get better. And you're tempted to give up. You try to get your finances in order, and just as soon as you do that, something breaks at the house or the car breaks down. It's always something to cause opposition, to discourage you. You know, attacks are going to come, and we see in this that one of the number one ways of attack comes through words. Words cause us to question God, and they cause us to question ourselves, question our ability to keep going, to question our motives. And we start hearing and saying things to ourselves. You can't keep this up. You'll never get that done. This is too big a task. You can't do this. Who do you think you are? And many times we say those very things to ourselves. But here's where it really, really gets good. And we see what Nehemiah does in the face of these kind of attacks. He said, hear us, O our God, for we are despised. Turn their insults back on their heads. Give them over as plunder in the land of captivity. In other words, Nehemiah, he's not playing nice here. He's praying, he said, Lord, expose these men for who they are. Don't let them discourage the people. Bring us through this time. He keeps going to verse 5. He says, do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sins from your sight, for they have thrown insults in the face of the builders. Nehemiah's just saying, don't let this slip by. Expose them for what they're doing. And hear our prayers, oh God, because we're trying to do a great thing. And I think you would be behind that too, God. And he says in verse 6, so we rebuilt the wall till all of it reached half its height, for the people worked with all their heart. Now, there's two things I want us to notice here that Nehemiah does in the face of these attacks, these words, these threats, these criticizing words to discourage them. The first thing is he cries out to God. That's what we talked about last week. You've got to cry out to God. When you're going through adversity and struggles, you have to cry out to God. You know, he says, God, I know you can't be pleased with what these other men are doing. Please don't let them be successful. Please stand by us. Please help us to be successful in this. Cry out to God. And the second thing you got to notice here is that when you pray, or while you pray, or after you pray, get back to work. Remember last week we said that a study showed that in the middle of a terrible crisis moment, that 10% fight, 10% take flight, and 80% freeze. And we do not need to be the type that's going to freeze. That in the middle of our time of prayer and crying out to God, we keep doing what we know is right. Don't let it stop you. Look at what happened next. Verses 10, 11, and 12. It says, meanwhile, the people in Judah said, the strength of the laborers is giving out, and there is so much rubble that we cannot rebuild the wall. Also our enemies said, before they know it or see us, we will be right there among them, and will kill them and put an end to this work. Then the Jews who lived near them came and told us 10 times over, wherever you turn, they will attack us. These people, in other words, were beginning to get discouraged. Maybe it was the words, maybe it was the amount of work, and it says here that they began to see all that they faced, and they began to become discouraged. Can't you identify with that? That when all of the things begin to happen and you're trying your best to do what's right, but it just seems like things just turn against you. And one thing piles up on top of another, and things just don't seem to go right. And you begin to focus on the negative instead of the positive. And when we begin to feel discouraged, we need to ask ourselves a very important question. It may sound like a silly question, but we need to ask this. Where is this coming from? Where is this discouragement coming from? Now, there's several causes of our discouragement. You know, our loss of strength, fatigue. I mean, we physically and mentally can just get tired. You know, we all need a break. We need to be able to get away. We need to escape. We need to slow down at times. This is not a joke. It's not a sign of weakness when you need a day off, when you need to just get away. To me, this is one of the biggest concerns facing the American Christian today, is that we are so busy doing good things. You know, we're doing things for our families, with our families. We're doing good things. They're not evil things. But we're so busy that we find ourselves not resting in our escape, but becoming more fatigued in our rest, in our enjoyments, and our pleasures. It's a big problem that we face, that we're not rejuvenated by our time off, but we're even just made tired. This is a biblical principle to take time to rejuvenate. Moses was told, you're taking to own too much. Give some of this away to other people to handle. Jesus would slip away from the crowds and find a quiet place to pray and to rest. You know, there's another reason we can get discouraged, and that's the loss of vision. You know, we can lose our focus. Now, these people, did you notice they were building the wall, and it says the wall was halfway built, but now they just began to see all the rubble, all the destruction from the past. And they were like, we'll never get this done. It's a true one of those, do you see the glass half full or half empty? You know, it kind of reminds me of that story I heard many years ago. A very controlling wife with her husband. He comes in and says, honey, we won the lottery. We're rich. And her first question was, where did you get the money to buy a lottery ticket? You know, you can lose your focus on the greatest things in life and lose your vision, and that can lead to being discouraged. Another one is our loss of confidence, and that just means we're losing our faith. You know, we didn't read it today, but Nehemiah came back to the people, announced that when he came to the people of Jerusalem, he announced that what he intended to do and that how he was going to rebuild the walls, and the people were ecstatic, and they got a rally cry, and they jumped in and began to work. But now they're getting discouraged. They're losing their confidence that they can accomplish this great task. And I think it kind of ties in pretty tight to this next one. That's a loss of security or fear. Fear is the number one battle or arrow that Satan shoots at us. It's to cause us to fear, to lose our faith. The what ifs of life. I mean, if there's ever been a time in our time, the world we're living in, is a time of what ifs. What if I get sick? What if the wrong person wins the election? What if this happens? What if we shut down again? What if we quarantine? What if this goes on for another year? What if I lose my job? And the what ifs of life, they can lead to so much fear in our lives that we're paralyzed. And those who were attacking the workers of the walls of Jerusalem, they knew exactly what they were doing. They were planting fear in the hearts of the people. Fear is a favorite ploy of the devil. But you know what Nehemiah did in that? Look at verses 13 and 14. He said, "Therefore I stationed some of the people behind the lowest points of the wall, at the exposed places, posting them by families, with their swords, spears, and bows. After I looked things over, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, 'Don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers and your sons and your daughters, your wives and your homes.'" Nehemiah wasn't a complicated man. He was a determined man, but he wasn't complicated. With every adversity that was put before him, he did the same thing. He prayed, he came up with a plan, and then he kept working. And that was how he faced adversity. What do we do, or what can we do, following Nehemiah's model, to face the adversity, the discouragement, the criticism that we're getting here and now, November 2020? What can we do? Well, I think the first thing we can do is remember. That's what Nehemiah said. When Nehemiah saw that the workers were getting discouraged and that the threats were mounting against them and that the threats were real, he told them to remember the Lord. He said, "Remember the Lord and how great and powerful he is." You know, I thought about this week. We are just 47 days from Christmas. And no matter how things go in the next 47 days, it's going to be a different Christmas than probably we've ever experienced. In your families, at churches, in America, around the world, it's going to be different. It made me think about how different it was leading up to that first Christmas. You remember that an angel named Gabriel came to a young Jewish woman, and said, "You will be pregnant. You will be with child." Surprise! And even though you haven't ever slept with a man, you're going to have a baby that's just going to turn out to be the Savior of the world. And Mary's response is just what I think any person would have. She said, "How is this possible? How can this be?" And Gabriel gave the answer. He said, "For nothing is impossible with God." Nehemiah said, "Remember how great and powerful your God is." Gabriel said to Mary, when she was faced with this unbelievable story, he says, "Remember God. Nothing's impossible with him." How do we break ourselves out of the slumber? Maybe we've slipped into that place of discouragement, and maybe we've stopped the work and the moving forward and the progress in our lives. How do we break out? How do we change the flow in our life? Oh, these are just some small suggestions, but maybe it's just changing the way the day goes for you. Maybe changing the music that you listen to something that's a lot more positive. There's a lot of positive music out there that brings the praise of God and worship of God into every moment of your life. Maybe you change what you watch on television. Maybe you watch less television. Maybe you change the way you talk to people and the way you talk about people. Maybe just keep some of the criticisms and the judgments to yourself. We're all living in tough times. So just change the way you talk to people and about people. Get out and do something selfless for other people. That's a big challenge for the time we're living in because of so much limited contact we have with people, but find a way to do something, to sacrifice, to serve someone else. A great example of that happened this week. Debbie Baker says that when she went to eat, and she let this young man go ahead of her in line. And then he, in turn, bought her lunch. And she said, that's fantastic. I can tell your mom raised you right. And he said this, he said, in the world we're living in now, I just think it's a good thing that we all can share some more kindness. And change the flow of your life. Do something good for someone else. And you may be surprised the blessing that comes back your way. You'll get to see a lot of good in people that maybe you've forgotten about. Remember the struggles struggles are part of God's plan, the growth plan. God can be trusted with our struggles. He's not caught off guard. There's a purpose in our struggles. There is power in our struggles. There's also, these struggles are temporary. And it's not that just they're a short amount of time compared to eternity, but they will determine how we view life. Whether we view it for the here and now, or we view it for eternity. Remember that you're fighting for more than yourself. When Nehemiah talked to the people, and when they said all these threats are coming in, they're threatening to kill us, and they're going to stop the work. And he came up with a plan. He put people guarding the wall, and he said he put them in groups of families. But he told them this. He says, remember, when you're building, when you're standing guard, you are fighting for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, your homes. Remember that you're fighting for more than yourself. Nehemiah was a great leader, and I doubt I'll ever be called to do something as great and huge as his was. But make no mistake about it, your task and mine is exactly the same as Nehemiah's. It's to fight. It's to carry on. It's to not get discouraged, but to keep going. And rest assured, there are people watching us the same way they watched Nehemiah. He was a great leader, and they followed him. And whether you know it or not, somebody is counting on you to do these things. Fathers, mothers, husbands, wives, friends, everybody. Realize what you're fighting for. And finally, I want to mention this, that you do not fight alone. You do not fight alone. Back in Nehemiah, when he sent the men to the walls with tools in one hand and a sword in the other, it says he sent them with their families. He wanted them to know they weren't alone. They were not fighting this alone. But he also did this one great thing. As he sent all these people out, he says that he kept the bugler or the trumpeter by his side to stay with him wherever. And then he told the people this. He said, you're spread out all along this wall, and it would be easy to attack us. But he says, pay attention to this. Nehemiah 4:20 says, whenever you hear the sound of the trumpet, join us here. Our God will fight for us. Nehemiah said, when you hear that trumpet, you run from where you are, you go to the sound of the trumpet, and we'll fight together. And God's going to fight for us. You are not alone. I think that's one of the greatest tragedies and challenges of this period of life that we're in right now, is it's making people feel so all alone. And it can make us feel hopeless. But God, just like Nehemiah wanted his people to know, you're not alone. You do not fight alone. Whatever struggle you're going through today, if it's a national struggle or a struggle just you and your family know about, or even if it's just you, know this. Remember the things of God. Remember how wonderful and powerful he is. And he will carry you through this, because your reward waits on the other side. God bless you. I pray as you take the Lord's Supper with your family today, that you'll remember just how great and awesome and mighty God is, and you can thank him for what he's done, and you can look forward to what he's going to continue to do. God bless you.